XLOOKUP is the newest lookup function in Microsoft Excel, being introduced back in 2020. It's intended to be a replacement for the use of functions like VLOOKUP, HLOOKUP, and index and match. So let's take a look at the basics behind the XLOOKUP function. First, let's take a look at a basic scenario. You have a table that includes things like vendor ID, name, and region, and then you have another table. In this case, this table has the invoices from various vendors. But for some reason, this table only includes the ID number of each of the vendors, and of course we want to know what the name of each of those vendors is. So this would be an instance where looking the information up would be relevant. So we would take the vendor ID number VN8842 and look for a match for that in the vendor ID column. Then, if we wanted to get the vendor name, we would specify that we wanted to get the return value to come out of the vendor name column. So use VN8842 to look over in this column, and when you find it, go into the matching column over on the right-hand side and retrieve whatever's there. And we would, in this instance, get Veracruz Consulting. Now, this is the most common lookup scenario. As you can see, both of these tables are known as vertical tables. They're vertical tables because they have headers at the top, and then all the data goes down the page vertically. So in the olden days, back in the early 2000s, in the 90s and the 80s, we would have used the VLOOKUP function to accomplish this. And on top of that, we would have told the VLOOKUP function that we wanted to find an exact match. That's important because VLOOKUP, XLOOKUP, all of these lookup functions can either find an exact match or a close match without going over. In this instance, finding the vendor ID VN8841 would be a really bad thing, so we definitely want to get an exact match. Now, another scenario that looks a lot like this one is something like this, where we say to ourselves, okay, I want to find a match for $4,500. Now, the problem is that you can't make a table that says, at $0, we do this. At $0.01, we do this. At $0.02, $0.03, $0.04, you can't make a table like that. So in these types of scenarios, we instead create ranges. We start at 0 and we say, okay, starting from 0 and up to $2,499, we will do this. Then, at that $2,500 mark, we'll do something different. And then at $10,000, we'll do something different, and on down the line. So here, we want to do another vertical lookup, because again, the data is arranged vertically. There are headers up at the top. But this time, we don't want to find an exact match. No, we want to find the closest match without going over. And so we have a variety of VLOOKUP that does that, and we also have a variety of XLOOKUP that does that. Go vertically down the page and find the closest match without going over. But a scenario that VLOOKUP couldn't have solved, and people had to jump through extra hoops for, is something that looks like this one. Let's take a second, and I want you to see what the problem is here. So we know that we want to find the vendor region of Central United States from the left-hand table, and we want to find it somewhere in the right-hand table. But this time around, the region column is on the right side of the supervisor column. Now, something to know about VLOOKUP is that VLOOKUP can only look down the left side of the data. It can't look down the right side of the data. So in this instance, in the old days, we wouldn't have been able to use VLOOKUP to be able to look for something in the right-hand column and retrieve a matching value in the left-hand column. Instead, we would have broken out index and match, which is a combined nested function and we would have found an exact match again here. So now you know that in the old days there were enough different lookup scenarios that you would have had to break out either VLOOKUP or index and match to solve the problem. But there's yet another lookup function that you could also need to use, and that would be if the data was not arranged vertically, but instead was arranged horizontally. So for some reason, the person who made the table on the right has decided that instead of the different regions going down the page, they should instead go across the page. Now, if you think about this, in the old days, we would have used VLOOKUP to vertically look something up, and so we would have also used HLOOKUP to horizontally look something up. So in the old days, we would have used HLOOKUP with an exact match criteria to be able to retrieve this data. But XLOOKUP, it turns out the X in XLOOKUP actually stands for being able to go either vertically or horizontally. So we now know that XLOOKUP replaces the VLOOKUP function, the HLOOKUP function, and the index and match function, and that it can find exact matches or close matches without going over. So let's see that in action here. Let's start with the most basic VLOOKUP scenario. Here we have a column with salespeople in it, and here we have a column with salespeople in it. And so we want to be able to use this column of salespeople on the right side to be able to retrieve the matching manager. So we go to cell G6, and if we're going to use the XLOOKUP function to solve this problem, we go to the Formulas tab at the top of the screen. We use the Lookup and Reference drop-down menu and find the function called XLOOKUP. Click onto XLOOKUP, and you'll see that the three required arguments are what is the value being looked up, where are the cells where we're doing the lookup, and what would we like to return. So the lookup value is over in cell F6, Freddie Morris's name. The lookup array is the set of columns on the right that contain Freddie Morris and all the rest of the salespeople. So in this case, N6 through N28. Now, we're about to copy this down the page, and that would cause a reference like N6 through N28 to shift on us. So we press the F4 key on the keyboard to put $ around N6 through N28. So now we know that it'll be able to retrieve information about Freddie, Isaac, Mark, Emma, Michelle, etc. All we have to do is specify what the return array is. So we come in here and we highlight the column of managers in 06 through 028, and once again press F4 on the keyboard to lock that in. Some other options that aren't available to you in VLOOKUP include, if we don't find a match, what would we like to put out instead? It'll automatically put out the NA error message, and that's a perfectly good thing to do. We could also do something like quotation marks and a few dashes to have that put in place of the NA error message. And then we have the match mode. Now, match mode is similar to the way it works in VLOOKUP, but you'll see here that XLOOKUP by default uses exact matches. And additionally, there are multiple different match mode codes available to us. Here on the Microsoft website, you can see that 0 is the default value. 0 says, look for the exact match. Now, already different from VLOOKUP and index and match in the old days is that you can specify either a positive one if you want to find the next closest bigger value, or a negative one if you want to find the next closest smaller value. In the old days, it was only closest without going over. You'll see additionally, there is an option for a wildcard match, which is option number 2. And just in the last month, Microsoft has released that there is option 3, which is the option for a regular expression match. You can see that they haven't even updated this page of the website yet to use that regular expression functionality yet. We'll take a look at that in a later video. So now we come back in here, we put in a 0 for the exact match. It's not a requirement to do this, again, because exact match is the default behavior. But by putting in a 0, you are guaranteeing that everybody sees that that is what your intention is. And then you click OK, and putting your mouse in the bottom right-hand corner so that your cursor turns into a black plus sign, you can then double-click and get everybody's sales managers to be filled in. But in the second scenario, where we're looking for the region, you'll see here that the region is now on the right side, and the supervisor is on the left side. This is something that VLOOKUP wouldn't have been able to handle, but XLOOKUP is. We can go to cell E6, go to the Formulas tab at the top of the screen and use Lookup and Reference, and again find the XLOOKUP function. We use the lookup value of Central United States in cell D6, and the lookup array of whatever cells here on the right contain those region names. In this case, it's L6 through L11. Remember that if you're going to autofill the range for the rest of these cells, make sure to put $ around your lookup array reference, in this case by pressing F4 is the easiest solution, and the return array, again highlighting the cells to the left, K6 through K11, and pressing F4 to lock that down. If not found, again, we could leave this as NA, or we can put in some other type of return. And for match mode, putting in a 0 will lock in that you intend for this to be an exact match. And then you click OK, and again, you autofill down, and all of those regional supervisors have been inserted. The only difference over here in the I column is that we now want to find not an exact match, but the closest match without going over. That's why we've started this range at the number 0 and then gone $50 and $100 and $500,000 after that. What we want to do is we want to say, if it's a value less than 50,000, we want to give you something to use, in this case the value of none. And then every other level has a label. So I go here to cell I6, I go to the Lookup and Reference drop-down menu and find that XLOOKUP function again. I use the lookup value of $1,500 in cell H6 and the lookup array of Q6 through Q10, and again press F4 to lock that in. And the return array of R6 through R10, and again press F4 to lock that in. But here's the unfortunate thing. Right now the match mode, remember, is the exact match mode, and $1,500 is not an exact match for anything. So we need to go to match mode and either put in a -1 for the next smaller number or a +1 for the next bigger number. In this case, I want to put in a -1, then click OK and autofill that in. So you see all of these values that are less than $50,000 come back as none. You see that a value of $220,000 comes back as silver because it's crossed over the $100,000 mark, but not yet crossed over the $500,000 mark.